So our first speaker will be Tim Heath, who has taught for 47 years in education as a teacher and a principal. He's taught in rural areas in New Zealand. He's taught in Savai'i and Savai'i, Samoa. Yeah, he'll tell us more about that maybe. And he's also been principal in Auckland's inner city Newton Central School. He is also a poet and an author, and he's got a couple, his books up the front there too, if you want to have a look later.
Ka tangi te titi, ka tangi te kaka, ka tangi hoki a hau ti he Māori ora. Te whare tūnei tēnā koe. Te marae ki waho, te whare kura ki waho, tēnā korua. Ngā haue whāngai ue tau mai nei, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Ngā mate o koutou rā mātou I tangi he tātou I tēnei rā. Haere, haere, haere. Te honga ora, tēnā koutou. E ngā mana, e ngā reo rau rangatira mā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. It's customary after a mihi to present a waiata, but I can't sing, so I won't. So I will, if I may, present a poem. And it is a poem about children, it's a poem about young mokopuna, and I hope it reaches you. And it's called A Small Day Out. Yesterday I walked on Kariotahi Beach with 5 of my grandchildren. Their words and laughter gulls circled around my head, half heard, but clinging like the gusted sand on my lips. They puppy-tracked around my steady plod, enviable energy unfocused, until they discovered splayed on the sand a plait of kelp. And they grabbed it, and they dragged it, not with the ocean's rock-tearing violence, just the soft disregard of small hands. And they made up stories about the kelp, full of sound and giggles and nonsense, the bleached wig of a marine princess, the remains of a mermaid and her dragon, a snake tangle, not dead, just waiting. And their shrill inventions climbed and soared over each other, but were lost in a blink with the finding of a dead fish. Its horror of stench and eye socket, triggering a new round of finger-dancing excitement and tumbling words, and giving me the chance to see again how brightly their stars were going to shine. So, one more. There's all sorts of things to say, and I'm so grateful to my niece for inviting us to come here. I'm so glad to be back in a classroom again. It feels a bit like a natural environment, and I'm so glad and proud to be here with my daughter. It's just great. And the fact that my son Peter's going to turn up later on. Now, all these people are related to the Matalavea side of our family, which I am by marriage, but not in fact. And the Matalavea family is a greedy family, and they stole all the tallness genes and left very few. But I, have got to forgive them for that. Now, what to talk about? I have to say this. I don't know how aware you are of the recent troubles of President Joe Biden in the United States, and how in his debate he was accused of bumbling and losing his way a little bit, and not being as sharp as perhaps he could have. Now, Joe Biden turns 82 on the 26th of November this year. I turn 82 on the 24th of August this year, which means that I'm older than him and likely to bumble and get lost more than he. So you will need to forgive me as we go along. Now, I know that the topic today is Pacific leadership, and I'm not really qualified to speak about that. I'm not a Pacific person. I'm not a leader anymore, and I'm not a woman, because most of the Pacific leaders I've met have been women. And yeah, anyway. I'll just leave it.
Have you met Ben?
With their thought. Yeah. Leaders I want to talk about some leaders that I've known in the Pacific. And I must start by talking about, and I'm sure all of you will know some of these people, who came to New Zealand as scholarship students from the Pacific way back, starting in really the late 1950s. And these people were ones who did well at their schools, and they were singled out as having potential and were going to become leaders. And they were picked up and they were transported to New Zealand, where they went to boarding schools and coped with huge cultural change and difficulty. And they left home, many of them, when they were 12 years old. They returned home. They were allowed to return home. They were financed to return home once every 3 years. So can you imagine leaving home when you were 12 and not going back till you were 15, and then ultimately not going back till you were 18? And that had a huge influence, and many of these people, their lives were just dramatically changed by that. I knew one man who came, who remained nameless, although he's now a prominent surgeon in Samoa, who was sent to New Plymouth Boys High School. And New Plymouth, near the mountain, is cold. And he went round all the time wearing a shirt, summer and winter. And people thought he must be really tough because he's not wearing a jersey. The truth was he was too shy to ask for one. And, you know, and from that experience he's gone on to be an excellent leader. Lopa's mother, Sianyu, came to New Zealand on a scholarship and went to a school called St Mary's in Stratford, miles and miles away from anywhere, miles and miles from Safuni in Savaki, and had to survive that cultural experience. And one thing that happened to her, as it did to many of these scholarship students initially, is that when school holidays came along, they had to stay at school because there was nowhere to go. And what a tough experience. I mean, later, as they befriended people, they may well have gone to home with some other student. But at that time, they had that great difficulty. And I look back at them and their leadership and their ability to survive that as just quite a remarkable thing. And it genuinely qualifies to be called leadership. I must say, and I think this was a sort of fashion leadership, that it would amuse me highly that with Sianyu, that when we were in New Zealand, she would wear a puritasi all the time, being traditionally dressed, and our friend Albert Went would wear a suit. He would wear a lava or whatever. In our pier, she would wear a mini skirt and he would wear walk shorts. It sort of worked, I suppose. And it was leadership. Yeah. I don't know. The next leader I want to talk about is Dr. Whanafi Larkin, or Maiai, as her name originally was, who was the first Samoan woman to get a PhD, which she got from the London School of Economics. And she was a brilliant student. And the legend is that in her final exam, everybody sat and wrote for hours, and she sat and wrote half a page. And it was so brilliant that she got top marks. Now, I hope that was true. But when she became Director of Education in Samoa, which was about the time that I was there in the late 1960s and early 1970s, she embarked on a program of Samoanisation of the education system and the changing from what had been a traditional New Zealand English-based curriculum to a Samoan-based curriculum, and introducing Samoan language as a legitimate school subject for the first time. And what she did was fantastic. The curriculum then was so different. I had a teacher in the early days who, when I was going to run the school, I went to run a school in Palauli in Savaii when I was about 28 or something. I had no right to do it whatsoever, but you know, I was there. And this older teacher came to me and he said, when you change from the past tense to the imperfect tense, do you use the pluperfect? Which was stuff that they taught and reported speech. I said, mate, I haven't got a bloody clue. It took him a while to sort of respect me after that. And what happened, of course, is that these people, wonderful people who were teaching there, had learnt things to teach. And it is really hard, as you will have found in the work you do, that if somebody's teaching and they've found something that they can teach, that's the rock and the river that they want to stand on. And it's very hard to leave that rock and progress forward to the next one. You know, change is difficult. There was back to Whanafi again, there was at the school, in the district in Savaii, a school inspector at the time, a lovely man called Sua, and he would come and see me quite often. He'd drive up and he saw it as his responsibility to give me guidance and instruction and leadership. And while we got on very well, I received quite a lot of lectures from him about what I should do and the rest of it. He was there one day and Whanafi, who'd made an unexpected visit to Savaii, came along and we greeted each other with a big hug and a kiss because we were friends. And that was all very good. We talked about everything. And then a week or two later, Sua came back again. And he said, Tim, I am no longer going to give you any instructions or directions. And I said, goodness me, why not? And he said, I saw that kiss from the director. Which is nice. Right. She was a genuine leader, and I think made a huge difference to education in Samoa, and I'm sure. Yeah. And I'm sorry just to talk about Samoa because I'm sure there are people there from other places, but I know very little about Samoa and even less about anywhere else, so I've got to sort of stay with that. In the village that I was in, which is Vaituamuli, which is part of the Palauli district, there was a paramount chief called Mamoisia, who was, and there's been many Mamoisias, but at that time he was a whamasino, a judge in the land court, and a very big and very powerful man, and a very wise leader of the village. And he was a leader that you could tell the whole village depended upon. That he would spend most of his time in our pier and he would come back in the weekend, usually with a few American dollars dripping out of his pocket. And people would come and they would listen, and questions that had arisen during the week would be resolved under his influence. And I had great respect for him. I would go along as the principal of the school to the Fono, which would be, they would would be the water pipe committee, and then there would be the electric light committee, and then there'd be the school committee. And you know, it was a long meeting. And the first one of these meetings I ever went to, I was determined to sit cross-legged on the floor properly. And I'd practice it, and it went on, and it went on, and I listened, and it went on. And I successfully kept my legs crossed, and then the meeting finished, and I stood up and fell down. which was not exactly leadership. And I want to read, because it's easier for me to read it, a piece about Mamoisia, which I think was, this is from a book that I wrote. It's the easiest book to write because it's all about me. And this, I think, was one of the most amazing examples of leadership that I've ever seen in my life. I'm talking about the year 1971. The most dramatic event that year was the killing of Mamoisia's eldest son, a tall, handsome lad, home from studies at the University of South Pacific in Arapia. He was wandering the village late at night with a group of young men. A fight broke out and a machete was produced. He stepped between the combatants, aiming to stop the fight. In the process, he received a fatal blow. The next morning, we drove early to the wharf at Salilolonga, knowing correctly that Mamoisia would be on the first boat. Back in that time, the only transport between the two islands were boats, which people called va'a kerosene, because they were really. We took him and his wife, Olive, back to the village. When we arrived, there were 3 matai from the killer's family sitting outside, their heads covered with fine mats in the ritual known as ifonga. They were supplicants, admitting the guilt of their family and asking for forgiveness. The mats were gifts of great value, but they served to make the wearers sightless and vulnerable. If the apology was not accepted and the offended party believed in an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, then they were totally vulnerable. Olive leapt out of the ute and ran towards the sitting figures, picking up and raising a rock as she ran. Mamoisia, with speed I did not think such a big man could find, sped after him. He took the rock from her hand and with his arm gently around her weeping figure, went to each of the supplicants and lifted the mat off his head. He offered a hand to help them off the ground. There would be punishment, imprisonment and retribution, but there would be no more killing. Which is a remarkable thing to a man to have done under those circumstances. A leader of Samoa who you will all know of and whose influence I think has lasted for so many years was Tupua Tamasese Leorofi III, which, as you know, he was a leader, a main leader of the Mao movement for independence in 1900, well, really right back to the beginning of the century, even when this incident happened, I think it was 1923, where there was the struggle for independence in Samoa. New Zealand administered Samoa under the Treaty of Versailles, having taken over from the previous German administration. And how can I say it? I'd been brought up, taught that Germans were really bad people, and we were really good people. And if you look at the administration of Samoa, the German administration was enlightened. They took with them an ethnographer, Joseph Kramer, who made an amazingly accurate study of Samoa at the time. They set up the West Egg plantations, all sorts of things. And then New Zealand came along, and New Zealand behaved in the way I thought Germans would behave. And it was bad. I mean, I'm rambling a bit, but talking to my old father-in-law, who we spent childhood in South Windley, he said and we're talking way back about 1920, well, again 1920, and he'd say a cry would go through the village, the New Zealand police are coming. And everybody would race around trying to hide their animals, because the police would go through the village in their jeeps and shoot dogs, horses, pigs. Just shoot. The protest movement of the Māo reached up here, and they were trying to get free somebody from police custody. And what happened then, and again it's a surprise, is that people like Tamasese, who'd been previously charged with things, were sent to prison in New Zealand. And heaven knows what that was like. And they were trying to stop this person being taken away. Anyway, as you know, shots fired out, and Tamasese was killed, murdered. And his final words, which we can read several times, were, "My blood has been spilt for Samoa. I am proud to give it. Do not dream of avenging it, as it was spilt in peace. If I die, peace must be maintained at any price." Don't you wish that there were leaders like that in the Middle East and Gaza and Israel at the moment? So many places in the world where people need the leadership which says, we do not want vengeance, we want peace. I think an amazing person. Samoan leadership. I can only personalise it, and again, looking back to the 1960s and 70s, where in the hierarchical system that prevails, there would usually be a male matai who was leading a family. And I have witnessed so often, as I did with Temalia, the wonderful brother-in-law I had there, again a scholarship student, and had gone back to Samoa and taught science and went everywhere, just such a lovely man. And it was he who gave me a wonderful phrase about the experts who would come to Samoa to give guidance in all sorts of areas. And of experts he said, X is an unknown quantity and spurt is a drip under pressure. Anyway, I remember going when he was speaking at important occasions, and he of course was the speaker, he was the man. And sitting behind him would be his sister and his wife Rana, and while he spoke they would whisper and they would prod, and when he sat down again they would tell him what he'd said wrongly, and it made me wonder about who was really the leader. I want to move on to talk about education, but before I do, if I may, I'd like to read you one poem, another poem, and only because thinking of Samoa, and this is about the market in Apia, and I'm sure you've all been to either that market or a similar market somewhere in a hot tropical country. Apia market. Bodies change in the tropics. Sweat becomes enthusiastic, uninhibited. Scents and sounds bypass overloaded organs and seep in through the glisten of skin. I stand in the Apia market, smile at signs about worship and spitting, thou shalt and thou shalt not. Eyes half shut, shirt perspiration transparent, sticks to the back's damp channel, and lips taste the sweet grit of trade winds. Sounds around me, harsh and soft, the seesaw banter of bargain, The falsetto complaint of anxious pigs, the rapid cackle of chickens irritated by idleness, and the baritone laughter of friends meeting. Muscular men, wrapped in loincloths of multi-hued grubbiness, shoulder banana bunches and taro sacks, and with the bounce steps of burden brush past this enchanted Palani loiterer. Skin registers heat. The warm swamp smell of vegetables in patient decline. The urgency of unrefrigerated fish and the voluptuousness of ripening in our pure markets. I think RTLBs are wonderful people. And I know when I was endeavouring, she told me to say that. When I was endeavouring to run a school, and when this system came in, initially it wasn't. It was huge, because it gave an opportunity for personal contact with kids, and at its best also with their families. And I think if we're talking about kids who are having trouble at school, contact with their family is just such an important thing. And if that contact can be made on their territory rather than our territory, so much the better. When I taught in country areas, as I did quite a bit, I used to go to the local pub and drink in the public bar. But this was only for professional reasons. But there was an opportunity there for people would talk to me about their kids at school, people who wouldn't come to school and talk. And that, it was their territory. And they had more command there than I did. And that was good. Similarly, I used to find it really important to, whenever I could, to walk to school, to live near where I was teaching. Because if you're walking, people will come and join you and talk. And I must say again, as an aside, that when I was principal at Central School, there was so much to do, and I could never get it done in the week. And somebody from the Educational Review Office said to me once, the trouble, Tim, is that you're spending too much time with children. And I thought, well, it's like that. Anyway, I would leave stuff, and then there'd be all this administration to do, and I'd go along quite often on a Sunday morning where I could work in peace without interruption. But people learnt that I was there, and they said, I thought I'd come along and talk to you while you're not busy. The other people who I see as great and leaders so often in a school are teacher aides, with whom you will interact a lot. And I think if I look back on my teaching in life, one of the things that I feel really good about was that at Newton Central School we had a lot of special needs kids, deliberately, and thus a lot of teacher aides. And most of them were young women from the community, and of them, 5 went on from being teacher aides to become teachers. And I thought that gladdened me. That gladdened my heart. You will be involved in kids who are reading and having difficulty with reading. And I have to say, I don't agree with the policy at the moment of the government to say that there is one method of learning to read, because I don't think there is. I think that children learn to read in all sorts of ways, and I can read and you can read, but what happens inside my head is not necessarily what happens inside your head. And I think we can work out our own ways of doing it. And I think so often of children learning to talk. Now, we don't teach them to talk, really. They hear it and they formulate something which allows them to talk. And when children learn to talk and they make mistakes, we love those mistakes. The mistakes in young children's language become part of the family legend, and we cherish it. But if somebody's learning to read, if they make a mistake, parents tend to say, wrong, and we don't do it with the same kind of understanding. I think children learn to read when they are ready. And for some people, particularly boys, they may not be ready till they're 7 or 8. And I think there's pressure on us to teach people to read earlier. We are one of the few countries in the world that sends children to school at 5. And for many kids, as you will know so well, they're simply not ready. And what happens is they're not ready, and they sit there and the classroom is confusing, and the only thing that they learn is, I am a failure. And it's tragic, and we don't have to do that. Nor do we have, I'm sorry to get political, but nor do we have to test them all the time. You know? It's madness. I don't know what your beliefs are. I hope I'm not treating them tough. The best thing I can say about all this enthusiasm for assessment and testing is this. If you weigh your pig every day, it will not get any fatter. Well, reading it. Reading, goodness me. I'll read a little bit of this, and then I better give you a turn. This is just a little bit from this book about my memory of learning to read. My memories of primary school are not so much vague as bitsy. Some scenes are as strong today as they ever were, but most have drifted. In a blur of happy and the not so happy. Two of these clear as if it was yesterday experiences are worth describing in some detail, although there are other strong contenders, like having a fist fight with another boy, with 100 chanting kids dancing around us, egging us on, wanting it to get worse. I got the strap afterwards to teach me not to be violent. The first of these memories is of learning to read. I was 7, nearly 8, and my parents and my teachers were worried. In Trim of 4, when I came to the front of the long queue of kids waiting with ragged reading books dangling from listless hands for the teacher to hear us read, I would start boldly with a memorised passage and then run out. The teacher would get angry and slap my legs, convinced I was pretending. She'd say, if you can read that much, you can read more. You are just being lazy, silly, naughty, wasting my time, and I shall talk to your father. I know him, and we both know he won't be pleased. My parents were more enlightened, although there were no random leg slaps, although if things got too bad, there was a formal session at the wash house with the wooden spoon. The truth was, I didn't know what they were all on about. I loved it when my father read to us. But the notion that the marks on the page had some connection to the stories eluded me. My teacher would make sounds, looking like a pantomime clown, and we would copy her, eyes rolling and mouths rigid with suppressed laughter. She would then write a word on the blackboard and take us through the sounds and marvel at our inability to see the whole. To this day, I believe phonics only really work for people who already know how to read. Then one day I got it. Everything fell into place. I raced through the readers in their neat box, then picked up one of the school journals reserved for the best readers, all of them girls. "What are you doing with that journal, Timothy Heath?" my teacher bellowed. "Reading it, miss. Story of men crossing big mountains." "Come here and read it to me then. And if you can't, I'm going to punish you for putting your dirty little hands on the girls' special books." I read it to her, using my father's expression and accuracy. I wanted to read more, but she stood up and she raced out of the room. I like to think that she'd wet her pants. We learn to read when we're I'm having a Joe Biden moment here. I think enough.
I'm going to give you the word.
Yeah.
I could listen to your day.
I could do it. It's up to you.
I'm going to read you one last passage from my book, because it's sort of about the education and it's sort of about the changes that have happened. And there are tremendous changes in Pacific Island education, and the education of Pacific Islanders in New Zealand is great. The establishment of in Māori ko Hangareo and Hongawha Samoa, etc., etc. Children must have their language, mustn't they? I mean, language is the tool of cognitive development. It doesn't matter what language you grow up in, so long as it's a strong language, because ideas can then follow. But they didn't used to think that. Remember, Māori kids were beaten because they spoke Māori. And when they first ranged, I was teaching the central city in heavens, 1960 or something. And then the attitude was stamp out the language. And we had to work hard to change it. And I guess this is about a leader, sort of. My second year at Teachers College, 1963. You all remember 1963? Was a comfortable romp, highlighted by times on section, when you send out times on section, demands of university and blossoming friendships. One of these friendships was with Ezeta, a sparkling young woman from Tonga, who had joined our group halfway through the previous year. I adored her full response to life. She would laugh, and the whole room would laugh. More than that, if she was sad, she cried great, gushing, uninhibited tears. The tears I'd witnessed when I was growing up never involved anything more than small sniffs and ironed handkerchiefs. Ezeta's enthusiastic bursts of sadness seemed like a miracle. She was clever and funny and had a burning desire to become a teacher. On one section, she was listening to a Tongan boy read. He stumbled on the word octopus, and she gave him the Tongan translation, wheke. Several other kids heard, and they started discussing their words for octopus. It's one of the words that appear in slightly different forms in most Pacific languages. Māori, se wheke, Samoan, ve'e. Their discussion broadened into finding other words that were similar in their various home languages. The discussion was interrupted by Ezeta's associate, and she was subsequently counselled by the principal and various people at Teachers College. Everyone knew she was trying to help, but she needed to realise that by speaking other language other than English, she was seriously disadvantaging the children. The word wheke came to symbolise what some of us were wanting to achieve in the education of the many Pacific Island children entering the country. We resolved that when we had our own classrooms, we would have a large picture of an octopus on the wall to symbolise our openness to other languages. I'll go on to the next little bit, I suppose. One weekend, Isetta and I were walking on the rocks at the northern end of Orewa Beach. We did things like that despite her strict Methodist beliefs and the fact that she lived at Atalanga, the Tongan Queen's residence. On this occasion, we encountered a small octopus in a rock pool. She grabbed it, and its tentacles grabbed her arms. She stripped them away, turned it upside down and pressed it against her mouth and bit something. The octopus ceased struggling and hung from her hand like a piece of seaweed, dripping dark nautical ooze. I was truly, madly, deeply impressed. I don't know if you have ever kissed somebody who was just bitten an octopus. It's a very special experience. How uneasy I think on that note I'll stop any further. But look, I thank you for being here, I thank you for listening, and most of all, I thank you for the work and the leadership that you're doing. Tautai te lela.